Hello, everybody, and welcome to Thursday Zoom. I know some of you are sick, and I hope you get to feeling better. But of course, I'm recording this for you, so you'll get to see it in live time. You can see our nice lady here. She is working while she's in school. I love it. I love it. It's working hard. So I'm going to start off with some announcements. So Thursday is our last day in class for 2 weeks. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to do any work for 2 weeks. If you're behind, you need to get caught up. If you're not behind, you get 2 weeks off. If there's a particular assignment that you need for me to open back up for you, please reach out to me. You have until 3 o'clock Thursday to reach out to me, because after that, I will not be back until the 24th. And that's Christmas Eve. So you guys get the point. Try to get to me before Thursday at 3 o'clock. The Zoom on Thursday will be fun. I don't know what we're going to do yet. We may do some sort of a Christmas movie trivia or something like that, just to kind of send us off in a little bit of a encouraged Christmas spirit for Thursday. I think that that's all. You guys see a new face here. This is Miss Brandy Guillory. She is going to be one of our new medical billing and coding instructors, and I'm kind of putting her on the spot. She and I have known each other for many years, and what I'm going to do is just kind of open up and let Miss Elise ask some questions, and then our other lovely lady in between, she are doing her checkout. She may have some questions, but Miss Elise, can you go ahead and ask Brandy your question?
Yeah, my thing is that before you went into medical billing and coding, was it that you wanted to just do the medical billing and coding and not get to know the hands-on experience first before you started doing that? Because that's what I felt like I needed to do, was to understand the medical field first and then know what the ins and out of what all was taking place or what I had to do in order to go to the medical billing and coding. And with working in the healthcare field doing home health work, now I understand where all the work behind everything else was, the medical billing and coding, what people had to be charged for, what they had to come in and they had to take care of the Medicaid, Medicare part of it. My thing was just to not know that, all of this extra stuff came along with it. I did part of it in documenting what I had to do as a nurse assistant, but I didn't know all the other requirements to it. So I'm glad, with that, I'm able to understand the medical billing and coding now. So I'm just wondering, you didn't want to do that first and then go into the medical billing and coding after it.
So let me clarify your question. You wanted to know if, okay, I'm sorry, do y'all hear that buzzing?
I think I know it. I think I know what she's asking.
Okay, go ahead then, Brandy.
Well, Miss Elise, you've got a jump start on what I did when I started medical billing and coding. When I started it, I just needed a job.
Right.
I had been unemployed for almost 9 months because I was taking care of my dad while
Mm-hmm.
he was passing away, and at when I got back from settling all his affairs, my savings was depleted. Everything was in the red, and I just needed a paycheck. And I was lucky enough that I got I knew somebody who knew that I had a bachelor's degree. My original degree was in IT, computer science degree, and that got me in the you know come give it a try and see what you think. And I've been doing it ever since. Um, where we lived in Alexandria, they're just when I graduated in Best Buy's Geek Squad. That was the best I could do with my $40,000 degree.
Hmm.
Was make $10 an hour at Best Buy. and that just wasn't going to work. And so I went to work doing medical billing and coding, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and have been doing it ever since because that's what makes me the best paycheck. Honestly, that's what changed my situation, and is continually I gain more experience in the field, changing our situation for the better. So you've got to jump start
Brandy,
on
you keep freezing up.
where I was when I started having coding about way doctors' offices ran, nothing at all. So
And
that's how I got my start.
we were opposite. I did some schooling first, not the type of schooling you guys are getting, but I did an online course, but not like as in depth as what you guys did are getting. And I knew somebody, and that's how I actually stepped my foot
I've
in the
got an
door.
audio lag, Marshall.
Miss Elise, are you getting an audio lag from me, or is it just
No, I can hear you. I can hear you good.
What about Miss Brandy?
She's kind of breaking up.
Yeah, Brandy, I'm getting
She's
an
in and
audio
out.
lag from you. I mean, we're kind of real time, but so I did it a little bit differently. So there's not really a right and a wrong way to do it, honestly. But again, there's benefits in both. I got some schooling and then I got experience, where I think
Right.
if you have experience and you're in, and you have that medical terminology and you kind of understand, documentation and things like that, that's definitely a great positive start. But not just that, you worked in the medical field, so your resume already looks better.
Right. But I think it's more scarier for me right now, because the thing is that I'm learning all the back part of it with the medical billing and coding.
Mm-hmm.
And it, to me, to go out there and to put myself out there and being able to just be comfortable in doing what you did, it's kind of scary.
Yeah, well, you know what? It was very scary for me too, because even though I didn't have a career, I worked jobs, but I was pretty much a stay-at-home mom. And I homeschooled my children and I was very sheltered. And when you jump from that straight into a medical field, it is culture shock. It's culture shock.
Right.
But you just learn little bits at a time. I don't know why everybody, I think Miss Brandy said it was kicked her out, and I guess it kicked Jasmine out too. But anyway, so I don't know, it must be their internet.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry about that, guys. I lost my train of thought. Can you believe it? I lost my train of thought.
No, we were talking about the coding part of it.
Right. Well, and also with being comfortable with the job, I think we always have to remind ourselves that you're not going to be expected to walk into an office, pick up a medical record, and just go at it.
Right.
That's just not something that's going to be expected. I mean, there's going to be time to train and time to learn your specialty, like cardiology, and learn the billing and learn the insurance and learn those things. You're not going to be expected just to hop right in and know it all.
Right. And I think that's what it is for me. It's just trying to hop right in and knowing all the billing and coding and woo, being comfortable with doing it, because I always did hands-on experience with everything.
Right.
I never had to really actually sit down and look for the coding or document all the codings of what I was doing. Someone else did it.
Right.
So.
Well, I promise you, school is much harder than the actual job. Because I went backwards. Remember, I came from the actual job and came into doing school with you guys, and the job was much easier. What I
Right.
coded was much easier sometimes in these scenarios. I really have to hunt and fish sometimes. But anyway, okay, so we are going to talk about sepsis today. So
Okay.
I do have a little bit of a slideshow for us. I've cut it in half, so there's not so much, but I want to talk about sepsis, and I'm going to point out as I'm going through the slides why I've chosen to talk about sepsis. It's all about money. That's why I want to talk about sepsis. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So let's talk about sepsis and SIRS, and we're going to be talking about how to code it right with the ICD-10-CM. Sepsis, SIRS, and septicemia have historically been difficult to code. Much of the confusion is due to the changing of terminology, evolving definitions, and guideline updates over the past 20 years. The ICD-10-CM has introduced more changes to sepsis and SIRS coding. I think they've kind of leveled off on that a little bit, but I know for a couple of years they did a lot of changes. It's critical to code sepsis properly due to the impact the diagnosis has on reimbursement. So, for example, we're going to consider this following case study, and it's pretty long, but remember, I'm not asking you to code it. I just want you to look at the example, and we're going to talk about it. So, a 39-year-old patient was admitted with a diagnosis of community-acquired pneumonia in the setting of presumptive influenza and concurrent sepsis. In the history and physical exam, it was documented that the patient had, I highlighted that word because I wanted you to see the word had, sepsis, and SIRS, meeting the criteria of leukocytis, fever, and tachypnea with pneumonia as the source. The sputum culture was positive for Pseudomonas pneumonia. The patient had a 6-day stay. Okay, so now they're going to be discharged. The discharge diagnoses were influenza with pneumonia bacterial superinfection, positive for Pseudomonas, as well as acidosis, asthma, exasperation, hypoxemia, and chronic bronchitis. So they were diagnosed with a lot, discharged with a lot of diagnoses, right?
Right.
So that whole line there that I have highlighted was what they were discharged with being diagnosed with. Sepsis and SIRS were not mentioned on that discharge summary and are only mentioned sporadically throughout the progress notes. As the documentation stands with what I have highlighted, what they were discharged with, this is the coding. So J1108 is influenza. I'm not going to read through all of it, but those are the ICD-10 codes. So you're the coder. We got those diagnoses. We send it to the insurance company without sepsis. They're going to get reimbursed $5,694.01. Okay. So, but if you queried or questioned the physician regarding whether he or she agreed with the diagnosis of sepsis and it resulted in a positive response, the chart would be coded sepsis as your first listed diagnosis, and then your other diagnoses, and look at the reimbursement, $10,621.61. The difference in reimbursement is $4,927.60, which is a significant amount. The documentation of sepsis and SIRS must be solid to code a chart accurately and receive proper payment. So does that make sense? And why, if you're going to be coding an infectious disease, that we want to hit sepsis really hard? You see the difference in the reimbursement amount? So let's talk about our original medical record. Sepsis was mentioned, but they did not mention it on the discharge summary. So why then would we ask the physician? Well, first of all, because we're talking about it now, and every time you see sepsis, you're going to say, wait a minute, that carries a lot of money. I need to pay close attention, right?
Right.
It's very hard to get sepsis paid by the insurance companies because it's such a high-paying diagnosis. So we have to have our documentation, and if we're unsure, we need to ask the doctor, because that sepsis and SIRS was listed in that original medical record, right? So if we ask him and he says, oh yeah, I want that as the first listed diagnosis, he's going to get double the money for that. So I wanted to just make that point. That's why I really kind of picked sepsis for us to talk about today, is because the reimbursement possibilities are huge. So do you see why we would have asked the physician if he wanted us to code sepsis in that scenario that we just looked at? Because
it's so many infection or so many diagnoses falls under it, right?
Right. But the reason that we even asked about sepsis is because whenever we first read that medical record, it said that they had sepsis. Patient was admitted and had sepsis, but it only mentioned it sporadically. But when they discharged the patient on that discharge summary where I had it all highlighted, it wasn't listed. But because the coder knows the reimbursement possibilities, if the doctor agrees in sepsis as part of the diagnosis, they know that that's going to double that reimbursement. So you should always ask. There's no reason to ask if sepsis is not put there, right?
Right.
If there wasn't any sepsis mentioned in that medical record, we wouldn't say, hey, do you want to add sepsis, doctor? Well, no, but because it was mentioned in the medical record, it's worth asking the physician about. Okay. All right. So we're going to go back to our slideshow. I do want to say that with all this, the information I'm giving, we are going to be looking at examples. So, well, if I can get my mouse to work here. Okay, so let's talk about localized infection and sepsis. Sepsis almost always begins with a localized infection. The source of the systemic infection is typically pneumonia, a UTI, cellulitis, or a complication of a surgery or device. When these infections are contained, they are self-limiting, but sepsis can occur when the infectious organisms, got tongue-tied, the infectious organisms enter the bloodstream. For this reason, it's important that localized infections are identified and treated promptly. So let's talk about some coding tips with localized infections and sepsis. If the patient is admitted with a localized infection and sepsis or severe sepsis, the code for the systemic infection should be assigned first, followed by a code for the localized infection. If the patient is admitted with a localized infection and the patient does not develop sepsis or severe sepsis until after the admission, the localized infection is coded first, followed by the appropriate codes for the sepsis and severe sepsis. That was a lot of words, wasn't it? Sepsis and severe sepsis, and after this and on that. Okay, so I know that that was a lot of information, but I'm going to give you an example that will make it make more sense. So a patient was admitted with pneumonia and acute hypoxic respiratory failure. That's why he was admitted. On day 4, the patient gets worse and becomes hypotensive and is diagnosed with sepsis, septic shock, and acute renal failure. On the discharge summary, pneumonia is documented as the principal diagnosis. So let's look at how we would code that. So we're going to use pneumonia as our principal diagnosis. Then he had respiratory failure with hypoxia. He had sepsis, kidney failure, and severe sepsis and septic shock. Okay, so you may be thinking, why didn't we put sepsis first? Is that what you're thinking?
Mm-hmm.
Can I answer that?
Sure, Miss Brandy, you answer it.
Okay. It's because when he was originally admitted, he was admitted with just the diagnosis of pneumonia, with the hypoxic respiratory failure. The sepsis didn't come in till later, 4 days later.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's not the principal.
Makes sense, ladies?
Makes sense.
He didn't come into the hospital with that diagnosis. He came with the pneumonia. He became septic after. So remember, we're always putting those puzzle pieces together and we're following that story, right? And what we're doing is we're taking our story and we're conveying it to the insurance company the way it happened. So Mr. Jones came to the hospital, he had pneumonia and he had respiratory failure and he kept getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And now he's got sepsis and he's being discharged with sepsis. So we're telling them with our codes, our story, not with our words, right? So we're just following that medical record. So does that make sense? All right. So let's talk about SIRS. SIRS is the body's clinical cascading response to infection or trauma that triggers an acute inflammatory reaction and progresses to coagulation of the blood. Impaired fibrinolysis. Y'all know I just butchered that word. It's okay. And organ failure. SIRS is manifested by 2 or more of the following symptoms: fever, tachycardia, tachypnea, leukocytosis. Sorry, that one gets me. Leukocytosis, or leukopenia. Miss Brandy, I get tongue-tied all the time. They're used to it.
Well, Marcia,
go ahead.
I can mention somebody that, we worked with that coded for 20 something years, and she would still get tongue tied on some of that stuff, some of the terminology. So don't let that get you down.
It's much easier to read than it is to speak.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some documentation issues with SIRS. When SIRS is documented on the chart, determine if it's due to an infectious or non-infectious cause. SIRS due to a localized infection can no longer be coded as sepsis in ICD-10. If SIRS is due to pneumonia, it is documented the term sepsis must also be, hang on, let me go back and look at that again. If SIRS due to pneumonia is documented, the term sepsis must also be documented to code a systemic infection. This is a major change from ICD-9. If the term sepsis is not documented with SIRS, when it's due to a localized infection, you must ask for clarification from the physician. Again, a lot of words, but what do I have for you? An example. A 27-year-old patient is admitted with fever, tachypnea, and a high lipase level. Is that right?
I think so.
That word just doesn't look right to me. Okay, moving on. Patient is diagnosed with SIRS due to pancreatitis, and there's that word, due to. So it's going to be acute pancreatitis unspecified in R6510. Do you guys have your ICD-10 manuals handy? So I want you to open your ICD-10 manuals, and I want you to go to R65.10. R65.10. And then I'm going to tell you why I'm making you open your books to that.
There.
You're there, Jasmine?
Yeah.
Okay. Miss Elise, let me know when you're there.
Okay.
I don't have my book yet, but I'm looking it up online.
I'm coming.
Well, we're not going anywhere.
Okay. Okay. R.1560.
No, R65.10.
Okay.
So when we get to R65.10, that is SIRS of non-infectious organ without acute organ dysfunction. Now, I'm going to go back to the scenario in just a minute, but I want to tell you why I'm making you open your book. Well, I'm going to hold up my manual. Y'all know I didn't get out my document reader. Okay, so A41. Well, I think A40 starts sepsis. And you see my little purple tab right there? It says sepsis. But then we're not done with sepsis there, are we? We also have to make sure that we know where our SIRS and severe sepsis are. And that is in this R65.10 area. And you can see I've gone in and highlighted and, I haven't made any notes yet, but I want it to be easy to find it. And so I label it. So I just kind of wanted to show you guys that that's what I had done. And so it just makes me feel comfortable with my manual, and you get a lot of success the more comfortable with your manuals that you are. They're yours. Come up with your own system to remember, make your notes, highlight. Y'all know mine looks like, look, y'all know it. I've got the label queen here. So, all right. So I'm going to go back to our little slideshow, but I just wanted to point that out. I thought that was important to show you. So it's going to be our acute pancreatitis and our SIRS. Let's go back to, so this was our diagnosis for, the patient was diagnosed with SIRS due to pancreatitis. So our acute pancreatitis in our R6510, which is our SIRS. So let's talk a little bit more about sepsis. Sepsis is a systematic inflammatory response due to an infection. It is not necessary, I want y'all to listen to this, it is not necessary for blood cultures to be positive to code sepsis. It is not necessary for blood cultures to be positive to code sepsis. What do we need to code sepsis?
A diagnosis.
Diagnosis with documentation, because I'm going to tell you, if you just code it because he says so and you don't do a little bit of homework, they're going to deny it the first time and ask for medical records anyway. Look, Miss Brandy shaking her head, she knows. So if you see sepsis, just make sure you have the right documentation, so when they ask for it, you can give it to them. So that's what we need. We don't need to see a positive blood culture unless that's all that we have. But unless he says sepsis, we're not going to even know to go look for that. So we don't actually have to have the blood culture in our hand. The doctor has that. He's going to tell you there's going to be other documentation to follow with that. So, but we are going to have documentation somewhere that says this patient has sepsis in order to get it paid. Because why? It's a lot of money. They're going to ask you, okay, if I'm going to pay you this money, you're going to show me where, why, where's it at? So remember, we talked about you would then make a copy of your medical documentation and you would snail mail it to them, or scan it or fax it, or, you know, whichever. It depends on what the insurance is. Okay, so let's go back. I know I keep flipping back and forth on y'all. So here's an example. A 45-year-old woman presents with severe stomach ache, fever, vomiting, and bloating. On a CT scan, a perforated bowel with abscess is discovered. The patient has sepsis with peritoneal abscess as the source. The peritoneal fluid and blood cultures are positive for group D strep. So it's sepsis due to the Enterococcus. Y'all get it. K65.1, the peritoneal abscess. K63.1, perforation of the intestine. So did they wait for a blood culture on this one to say that he had it? No, the doctor says this patient's got sepsis, because they could tell by the CT scan. So you see where they did not ask for, well, they were positive in blood cultures for group D strep, but they didn't say it was positive on the blood cultures for sepsis. But that doesn't matter. You don't have to have it. You just have to have it in the documentation that says the doctor says he has sepsis. Sepsis, not septis. I don't know what that is. All right, so y'all realize that there is like 50 more slides I could go through on sepsis, and I chose to stop. I chose to stop. This interests me so much because there's so many different parts of sepsis and what it can do and why you can get it and how you can get it and how to code it and watch out for this, but we don't need to go that in depth. I just wanted to kind of give you a red flag when you see sepsis. Okay, so our last thing for today is going to be your assignment. You're going to go into the daily assignment and you're going to see a video there. It's not long. I want you to tell me what you need to look out for just when you're coding sepsis. Just give me 5 good points. Don't overthink it. Don't overcomplicate it between what we've talked about in this video and the short video that you're going to be watching. Just give me a really good summary. It is important. If you can really get the details of sepsis the way we've been talking about them and get your mind wrapped around it and expanded and thinking outside the box some, the rest of these codes are going to be simple for you. The fractures, don't like fractures. Don't like the musculoskeletal. They already know I don't like the musculoskeletal system, but anything that's gross, pressure ulcers are coming up and I'm so excited. I like the oozy.
I'm sorry.
Okay, anybody have any questions? Oh, wait a minute. Sorry.